While Washington, D.C. is the capital of the country, not many are aware that it is also the center of the prison industrial system. For instance, the history of D.C. jail can be traced back to slavery. According to D.C. jail records, dating back to the 1850s, runaway slaves who fled from other towns and settled in D.C. were often captured through being identified by flyers or newspapers that then alerted white residents or D.C. law enforcement. Typically, these slaves were picked up from the D.C. jail by plantation owners and would be subjected to ritual killing upon returning to their plantations. The plantation owner's objective was to strike fear to all other captive slaves that any individual who runs away or defies the rules of the white plantation owners will be met with the same fate. This tactic didn't work with many rebellious slaves. Often what's left out of history is that many uprisings happened. Many captive slaves traced their lineage from the warrior tribes of Africa, such as Zulu, Fulnai, Mali, and the Maghrebine Berbers, whose origins date back to Africa, Europe, and Spain, which are commonly known today as the Moors. Their offspring carried the lineage and attributes of their ancestors and were some of the most dangerous warriors to any plantation in the United States. This often led to bloodshed and uprising, where many a plantation owner was slaughtered. Let's fast forward to when slavery ended in Washington, D.C. Looking at the statistics in arrests and how many were charged with capital punishment, readers will see a disproportionately high rate of black and brown executions compared to other races who were tried for capital punishment in D.C. The D.C. jail initially carried out its executions by hanging, which later was discarded by the D.C. jail on January 22, 1925. The last recorded hanging was of Herbert Copeland. He was an African American who allegedly killed 12 people, including police officers. The newspapers regarded Herbert Copeland as a cold-blooded killer, who sported a nervous smile on the gallows. He eyed each onlooker without hesitance before the trapdoor was opened. Once the gallows was outlawed, the next form of execution was the electric chair. The last reported execution in D.C. was in 1957. An African American named Robert Eugene Carter was convicted of firing a gun at an off-duty white officer and killing him while fleeing a store robbery. The newspapers dubbed this case as a robbery gone wrong. Interestingly, he was a first-time offender who was electrocuted soon after his sentencing. Capital punishment was outlawed in D.C. by the time Cadillac entered D.C. jail. Moreover, the mandatory death penalty was replaced by life imprisonment in 1962. As Cadillac walked through the old D.C. jail, the walls demonstrated the history of D.C. jail. Convicts were greeted by pictures of old wardens, as well as the executed convicts that adorned the walls. It was sort of psychological warfare to many new convicts, of those who met their final fate behind those walls, especially African Americans. Oppression will either break a man or bring out the lion within. For Cadillac, he became a ruthless warrior behind those prison walls. Multiple attacks on other inmates and the administration would happen at the slightest disrespect.